I just wanted to, thank our guest, Phil Nash, who is our consultant for the Equity Lens, and is going to take us through this next phase of implementation of the Equity Lens. And that is basically what some of the, I'll let him talk about some of the takeaways that we're going to have from this particular session this morning, and kind of the roadmap for us to move forward from this session as we start going into the nitty-gritty, if you will, of implementation of the Equity Lens. I want people to understand that it's not going to be, this is going to be one of those course correction things. We're going to be on flight. Wind will blow us this way, the wind will blow us that way, but we will be able to stay on course. And one of our navigators here will help us to retain our course corrections as we move through. A couple things I'd like to do first and foremost is to introduce a member of our board, Mike Eister, who is with us this morning. And he has a few remarks on behalf of himself and the board as far as this initiative is concerned. And from there, I'd like Mike to introduce himself, have a few words, and then for us to go around the room and introduce ourselves, and then turn it over to Phil. Okay, Mike?
Thanks, Greg. So I want to thank and commend you for being here. I know that while you're here, there isn't somebody back at your office taking care of all the work that you're not doing right now. So when you get back there, that pile's just grown because you've been here instead of there. So we really do appreciate your being here. I want you to know that this is really important work and that the board recognizes that this is important work. We all know that in the 50s and 60s, racism in our country was very prominent, and it was very out front. It was very upfront. It was blatant. We know that it's been illegal to discriminate for decades, and what's happened is that racism didn't go away. It just got stealthy. It just went underground, and well, to some degree, it went underground. What we know is that it isn't enough to say, I don't tell racist jokes. I'm a fair person. I don't believe in racism, and I'm not racist. We know that that doesn't prevent the police from stopping African American drivers. It doesn't prevent security guards in stores from following people of color around. We know that it doesn't prevent innocent black kids from getting shot. So just being a nice person isn't enough to combat this more pernicious underground stealthy racism. If we're going to combat that, we have to be assertive, we have to be aggressive, we have to be intentional. Just being a nice person will not cut it anymore. So what you're doing is really important work. It's right on the cutting edge of what's going to make a difference in the lives of a lot of people. And so I want to commend you. I want you to know that the board and President Hamilton fully support this initiative and recognize the importance of it. And that we're very fortunate to have a renowned scholar to lead us in this, and really two renowned scholars. Greg Evans I've known for years and have appreciated his work. I just, that's pretty much what I wanted to say, and say thank you for being here and for your contribution to this effort. It's important to the college, it's important to our students and to our staff and faculty. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike. It really makes a difference to have people in leadership say these things, because I was at a board meeting on Monday with President Hamilton and the board and some of the leaders of the college, and when a tone is set like that, it really makes a big difference, because sometimes people who are, in other places in the administrative ladder of any institution, they say to themselves, well, if I do this thing, even if it's the right thing, what are going to be the costs for me? And so it's pretty clear to me that this institution is behind this effort, and we'll see how far we can go. I mean, we're human beings, we're going to make mistakes. And I want to repeat one metaphor that I've raised several times before when I've been here. We are swimming in an ocean of isms, and all of us are wet. All of us. I personally am sexist, racist, homophobic. I'm trying mightily to work against those impulses, things I've learned since I was a kid. And there's ways in which I have to improve. And I hope that I have the strength to listen to the feedback you give me when you say, by the way, that hurt me a little bit as a woman, as an older person, as a gay person. And I have to be able to listen to that and, take it in and think about it and try to do better. And I think that is the attitude that I hope that we will all have today and during our time here. I don't believe in a system that says, never ever make mistakes. The first time you say something racist, you're out of here. That's not the way we can run things, because everyone is going to make a mistake. We're going to stub our toe. We're going to do something that may hurt someone else. The point is, how do we move on from that? If there's a pattern in practice of somebody continually saying things that are offensive to the women in their classes, well, then obviously we have to deal with that. But if there's something that happens, if I do something today that's offensive to you, or something that you feel is going to be hurtful to the students or the board or any other group, please feel free to talk to me either privately or in the bigger group, and let's figure out ways to get better at this, because it's a lifetime endeavor. It's not the type of thing where you can say, I'm not racist. The people who say that thing are the ones you got to be frightened of, because we are all racist, we are all sexist, we are all homophobic. So let's just get that settled, and let's celebrate the fact that we are here talking about equity lens implementation. Because like Mike said, you truly are at the cutting edge of a discussion that's going on in this country and in this world. And even better than that, the people at Lane are at the community college level, which I consider the most important place in education, because you are dealing with K through 12 people coming up into your program. You're dealing with a lot of students who are coming back as adult education people coming in from prison, from so many different worlds that need to have a second chance. And then some of your students are going to go on to vocational careers, to four-year colleges, or just on to life. And so you are really at the nexus point. You are at a place where you can have a big impact on people. And what I'm hoping is that you are going to have such a great implementation of the equity lens here that you will be able to impact the other community colleges here and the other community colleges around the country, and frankly, the whole education system in this country, because we need the things that you are working on today. And so we're not going to perfect it today. We're going to do a good job moving it forward. And then in the months and years to come, you're going to get so good at it that I hope some of you will become the trainers who go out and train other people. So that's my hope for today. So let's go around the room and introduce ourselves. And if you want to just say anything briefly to your fellows here, anything that's on your mind or anything that I should be aware of, please let me know. So please.
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Tia Gomez-Seller, and I'm an Academic and Retention Advisor at the International Programs.
Hi, my name is Marcia Sills, and I'm the editor for the President's Office, and I started out at the Florence Center with Russ.
Russ Pearson, I'm Service Dean at the Ford Center.
Mark Harris, Faculty, Substance Abuse Prevention, Counseling Department, Mental Health.
Sarah Lucia, Faculty in the English Department.
Lynn Nakamura, and I work with grants and professional organizational development.
I'm Deborah Butler. I'm Executive Assistant to Brian Kelly, and I think I'm part of this group as a consultant, but also as a member to work alongside.
My name is Dennis Gilbert. I teach physics here at Lane and have for quite a while.
I'm Christina Howard. I teach in health professions. I'm faculty here.
My name is Nadia Lucci, and I am the Multicultural Quality Family Specialist, and I work at Quality Care Connections here at LCC.
Sharon Hagan, dental hygiene.
Great. And want to say anything?
Greg Evans,
Greg,
administration.
And we have Andrea behind the camera there. Thank you very much. One thing I would request is please speak up, obviously for the camera, but I have a personal need. I am going to be getting a hearing aid in a couple of weeks. I have resisted it for a while, and finally my wife said, you know, you've got female students in your class and you can't hear those high-pitched voices. And so I said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and get a hearing aid. So when you're speaking, help me out personally, and then help people who are listening on the camera to be able to hear what you're saying. And all right, so that being said, let's look at this piece of paper. I'm sorry there's no PowerPoint for those of you watching at home, but what has happened in the technology sector is that we have gotten so used to using the digital technology, and I myself have written a book about it and done a lot of work with digital messaging, but I think there's something very primal, almost reptilian, when you can use your tactile sense and touch this piece of paper. It also encourages you to write something on it if you think of any notes. And it gives you something to take away, because I know you've got 300 other emails in your phone already, and you've got a lot of things on your mind when you leave this classroom. So hopefully you will have something to look at. And for those who are watching on other platforms, we will be describing what we're looking at here. So basically we're looking at an introduction. This is called the Equity Lens Implementation, a workshop for Lane Community College's Equity Lens Implementation Team.
Quick question, would you be sending this via electronic so we can put it in the shared folder so everyone
Yes, I
who's
could
not
definitely
here?
do that.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and the key to success for this program is openness and sharing. And so definitely we want any document like this to be accessible and available. So what I've done with the first page of this document is to just summarize some of the things that we've done, and I will just describe some of them orally. We have moved here at Lane and in the nation from a notion of whatever is out there is the way it is, and that education system frequently had people who were left out. So we had women who didn't get the education they deserved, people of color who didn't get the education they deserved. And we've gone beyond that over the past century, the past decades. We've moved towards the notion of public education, towards the notion of having everyone get some type of education. And then for people with disabilities, there's been a lot of improvements in that. And we are currently at a juncture where we want to have education that is going to help people not just for any particular field, but in general, have education that is premised on a notion of compassion, morality, and fairness. We want something that's going to be available to them because we want them to aspire to and reach the highest levels that they can. And so that is, to my mind, what Equity Lens looks at. It looks at not just fundamental notions of fairness, how many women are in the room, how many gays, how many blacks, how many, that's an easier metric. But looking at it as teachers, as administrators, as people who are staff members, how are we addressing all the people who are going to be coming into our orbit? This morning when I was at the hotel, I spoke to one of your students who is in the hospitality management program. She's working at a local hotel here. And so I just asked her, said, how are things going? She said, oh, it's great, I'm enjoying it. I said, well, what would you do to improve your situation at Lane? And she said, well, I've got this 8:30 class, all my classes are at 8:30, and then I've got another class at 2 o'clock, and I got this big block of time in between, there's nothing I can do, and then it prevents me from working. I need to be able to work straight through so that I can then have another block of time to work. And so I said, well, I can't promise anything, I can't, we can't accommodate everyone 100%. But this is the essence of what Equity Lens is. We're asking people, we're saying, how can we make your experience better? Are there barriers? Are there things stopping you from coming to school, from getting the most out of it, from fulfilling your needs, in this case as a hospitality management person? And so we may not be able to have classes that are not at 8:30. Maybe that's when we can get our teachers. Maybe we cannot compress that and have her next class start at 10:30. But at least we need to ask the question and make her know that we are reaching out to her, that we want her to feel that she's welcome here, and we will talk among the faculty, among other people, and say, hey, is there some way we can have a line of classes that start at 1 o'clock and go until 5? or maybe we can just do that at the downtown campus, and here we'll have the 8:30 to 12. Whatever that is, there is no set answer. And I think that is also part of the essence of this equity lens. It's not like I can say, okay, A, B, C, D, you're finished. You know, that's not the way this works. There's not a canned answer. There's not a Cliff's Notes of equity lens. And that's why it's good to see people from different backgrounds here, from different parts of the institution, people with different life experiences, speaking different languages. You each bring something important to this discussion, because I could sit here and write something and say, okay, here, Mr. Administrator, Mr. Board Member, here's the equity lens, we're done, and that's it. But that's not the way it works. We need people on the ground like yourselves to be able to help us think of ways to make this better. And then we need to talk to students like that person I talked to this morning, get their input, and ultimately try and fashion a curriculum and processes, programs that are going to be fulfilling the mission of Lane and ultimately of all of our community colleges and education in general. So we have had quite a bit of work going on here, and I'm very proud of it. I've been bragging to people all around the country saying Lane really is at the forefront of this type of education. And we have spent several years talking and meeting, writing. We have some wonderful stuff that's on the website, just want to thank Deborah, Sarah, Greg, other people who've been working on this for years. And this material is available in printout form and also on the website. And it gets you to think about some of these issues, because we do have to start to concretize. You know, just because there's not one Cliff's Note version of equity lens doesn't mean there aren't certain precepts and principles that other people have been thinking about. And we are part of a movement that's been going on all the way out to Madison, Wisconsin, up here in Portland, up in Seattle. There's a number of people around the country who've been trying to move us forward on equity lens. Fortunately, there are also people in the foundation world. I was talking to some people at the Lumina Foundation. There are other people who are saying, we need to fund this stuff. We look at what's happening on a national and state-by-state basis, and some of our public discourse is getting very toxic. It's getting hard to have people treated as human beings, quite frankly, and that's not the way it should be, particularly not here in an institution of higher learning. So we need to make sure that we think about ways that we reach out to these funders, have them, you know, help us pay for some of this, because Lane, like every other school, needs to have enough money to keep the doors open. So these are some of the things that we are doing here behind the scenes to make sure that Equity Lens moves forward and that Lane stays in the forefront of creating a good Equity Lens program, both for the students in Lane County and around the country. So I'm not going to go too deeply into what is Equity Lens, because a lot of the people here have already been doing this for several years. Is there anyone who wants me to just give a, yeah, Mark?
Just using the example that you talked about. So the college pays me to generate content, and so I've generated content, coping skills for stress and depression, how to avoid addictive behaviors, particularly in industries that welcome people who have a criminal record, welcome people who've had past addiction issues like hospitality, but actually don't offer any content about how to keep yourself healthy. And I offer content that keeps you healthy, and while it was making money, it got canceled by the college. And then there was this whole concern about credit excess or whatever. So all that content could be put online for that person to access in between the hours that, you know, they've got free,
Yeah.
and be more protective, more competitive in their industry, and stay within their industry.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, that's a perfect example of a barrier, a roadblock that has happened. Sometimes budgetary issues are the problem. Sometimes there are people within an administrative structure who are a problem. There can be all sorts of problems. The key to our equity lens discussion is to not personalize it, not see any one person is the problem. We're looking at processes, we're looking at structures, we're looking at ways, you know, we've got a board that's saying, please let us help, we have to be able to say to them, okay, maybe you need more teachers here, maybe you need more resources there, maybe you need to take this department and break it into 2 pieces, maybe you need to take these 2 pieces and put it back into 1. Maybe there's all sorts of things we can do to make things more efficient. And the most important word in this whole discussion is effectiveness. How can we effectively give the students they need the things that they need? They are coming here, they're paying their tuition dollars, they want to get something to be able to go back out into the hospitality industry, into the healthcare industry, into welding, or whatever they're doing. They want to succeed and excel in those fields. And so something like what Mark's describing, he has some things that maybe are not being fully utilized right now. That should be thrown into the mix here. How can we make sure that those resources are optimized and maybe even used in other departments? And that's part of what our discussion is, and that's what makes this equity lens discussion so exciting. Because now those of you in other departments say, oh, I have students with addiction issues, or maybe there's people who have a prison record and something, and I'm over in the healthcare industry, maybe I should access some of those materials. So again, all these things are good. They're all part of our equity lens discussion and part of the work that's going to go on beyond this discussion. So again, there are just a few basic questions that are asked, and we're going to finalize our questions today. At an earlier stage, we talked about these questions. You can see them right here. What policies, programs, and procedures are increasing marginalization or disparities in our school community? Second, what policies, programs, and procedures are reducing marginalization or disparities in our community? Third, moving forward, what can we do in a concrete way to reduce the marginalization disparities by improving our planning, improving our decision making, improving our training, allocating resources differently? And a fourth one would be, how do we promote healing and welcome communities within our school that previously had been marginalized or recipients of disparate treatment? So again, these are very broad questions, and you have moved that forward to refine those questions, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. And we've even added a 5th question. But first, turn to the 2nd page, if you would, and look at some of the objectives and work products that I hope will come out of it. We are meeting just for a few hours one morning, and we can't do everything. So let's talk about what I hope to get out of it, and then you tell me if there's something else you would like to get out of it. We want to just explain the basic equity lens concepts. We want to understand how that concept has been used at Lane and what its potential is for the future of Lane as a national leader in the equity lens implementation. And third, we want to understand and be prepared for the role that each of you in this room is going to play in this 2019 Equity Access year of our equity lens implementation. Because remember, we have a 5-year plan that we're implementing, and we're hoping to be able to do it well enough and to figure out how to document what we're doing so that we could create a replicable model that can be taken to other places. Because there are, like we said, there's all the other community colleges here, there are other places around the country that need this. So what I'm hoping is that your efforts are going to be more than just helping people on one campus, as important as that is. If you can make yourself a beacon of hope and of caring people who are using Equity Lens to make a better learning situation for all of your students, you are going to be a group of people who galvanize people all around the world. I mean, that's the beauty of the video that you're taking today and of the digital tools that are available. Because once you get known, the Lane model of doing this, and maybe we can have trainings or certification, there's no end to where this could go. But that will have a number of different important benefits. One is just, the students are going to have a better experience. You will be more effective as teachers and administrators and helpers of every kind here on campus. And second of all, it will bring better people to the campus, because teachers and others are going to be, on the East Coast or some other place, and they're going to say, I heard of this place called Lane that's trying to do this thing with Equity Lens. You're going to get idealists and doers and people who want to come out here and help out. You're going to get students who are going to come here and bring their whole self. And again, it's very important. You've got a lot of zombies walking around here on campus, and every campus has that. People who bring their body to campus, and they don't always bring their heart. and they don't always bring their spirit because they've been pushed down. Either they're having problems at home, they're having problems in the broader society, and sometimes they're having problems here on campus. If you're trying to get into a particular program and you're feeling diminished as a woman, or you're a trans person, or you don't feel you can come out to your classmates, your teacher, that's something that's holding you back. And we want to stop that. We want to say, bring your whole self. Bring your body and your spirit and your energy and everything. Because you know what? That's going to help me. That's going to help you. When you are a teacher and you've got a class full of people who are energized and enthusiastic and willing to take risks, you have a much better class. And so that is something, it's a little bit of extra work to do this equity lens, but guess what? The benefits are tenfold beyond that. So we are going to be a beacon of hope for the whole country and maybe the whole world. When the Lane model of doing equity lens gets out there, there's going to be some pushback. I guarantee there's going to be pushback. You see what happens when anybody tries to do something progressive, somebody tries to make the world a better place. There are people who are angry and benighted and sometimes mentally ill, and they do things that is not very nice, and sometimes it's destructive and violent. But guess what? We have to plow ahead anyway, because we need to have a better world, and we can't let those people define the world that we and our children and their children are going to live in. So let's look at this. Any other things that you hope to get out of today's session? Yeah, Christine.
So what I am interested in, and maybe it's evolving, is the amount of clarity with an intention at the leadership level and how that's being communicated to the campus community. Being on an implementation team can be effective,
right?
And it needs to have explicit, clear, authentic leadership support. And I'm glad to hear that you've had meetings. We have some new documents this year in terms of strategic priorities at the college, as well as an active review of the governance system. And I would like to kind of see where the equity lens components or ideals are integrated into how we identify ourselves and our strategic priorities, because I'm just not seeing that connection yet.
Okay.
But perhaps it's coming.
Yes. You want to say something?
Yeah, and Christina, one of the first things that we did in terms of building Phil's visit here was for him to meet with the cabinet and the board. And there were 6 out of 7 board members at that meeting on Monday. So the idea was for us to have some clarity, particularly among the cabinet, because not everybody on the cabinet fully understands what an equity lens is, what it means to the institution, how things will change culturally within the institution. And I think what I needed to happen is to have, bring in Phil's outside expertise to really inform both the cabinet and the board as to what we are doing, what direction we're going, what this means to the college, and to understand that we need to have resources and capacity to do this work. And Phil, you can talk a little bit more about that. Maybe you can as well, Mike, about how that Monday meeting went and where we kind of.
You want to just summarize what happened, or?
Well, I would characterize the board's interest in this as strong, and their commitment to it as strong. They recognize the importance of the work, and the one person who was not able to attend, I have no doubt about Melanie's commitment to the work as well. So I think that is not an obstacle. Now, you all know that we have to weigh things on the board, and we have to balance a budget. And so what I can say is that this is going to be something that is taken into consideration, this equity lens work, as we go through our policy making, budget setting, and all the other work that the board does.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah, I want to say I really appreciate Christina's question and the importance of that. But I think the language that Greg used about referring to the cabinet and the board, we need to be concrete like that. And I think to be more effective as a college community, we have to realize that leadership is something that's distributed throughout the college, and that we need to enhance that. So language is important, and I just think that we shouldn't just be referring to the top administrative structure as the leadership of the college. So just
We have to identify it.
yeah, we just say what we're actually, these hierarchical positions that we're talking about, that make where a certain level of decision-making is done, we can do that, but frankly, everybody here is taking leadership, and leadership is widely distributed across the campus, and arguably should be more so, and the equity lands might provide some guidance in that. So I'm going to throw out the suggestion that the idea that we find the leaders at the hierarchical top is something we might want to be open to looking at, and that I think we should personally.
Right. Yeah, and Dennis is exactly right. You can't have any top-down implementation of equity lens. It will never work. And the beauty is, looking at the people here in this room and having participated in these discussions for several years, I can tell you that you have the distributed leadership that you need right here at Lane, more than almost any place I've ever worked at. And having been at that board meeting on Monday, I can tell you, I was hearing from people, they were saying, please tell me how I can help. I'm willing to come and roll my sleeves up and do stuff. I want to help out with some of the research. We were throwing around some ideas that I think are very useful. For example, let's do something that finds some data here that can then be used to write reports and articles, and maybe get some of our junior faculty to participate so that they can get the research and writing done that will allow them to get tenure and become leaders in the field and go out and do trainings. There's ways in which one hand washes the other. Everyone wins. We say, please, let's figure out ways to work together so that everyone can learn about this. So we have strong administrative support. The president is totally behind this. We have a strong leadership team here. One thing that I want to reinforce that's very, very important to keep in your mind, there's a phrase that Gordon Hirabayashi used. He was a guy who was in the Japanese American internment camps many years ago, and he went on to seek redress. He ultimately got it later in his life, and he ultimately had a life as a Quaker leader in the Friends group. And he also was very inspirational to me personally. I mean, I knew his family, I knew him. And one thing he said, he wrote a book about this, and he also said every day in his life that idealism is realism. And that's the mantra that kept him going after being put behind bars and having to suffer as much as he did in his life. When it looks like things are really at the bottom, idealism is really the only path towards realism, because you can say the national climate has been poisoned in some ways, things are happening on the state basis, where do we go? We're all suffering. I could talk to every single one of you and listen to the sorrows in your personal life and in the lives of your students and colleagues and friends. But ultimately, we are here to try and pull each other together and pull ourselves up. And that's where our idealism has to be the galvanizing force. And it's manifested in the realism of our equity lens work. And again, it's going to be talking to that one hotel management student. It's going to be talking to all the people that we're working with. And with that being said, let's jump right into these questions that we have here. Because on the third page here, this is the latest iteration of the questions. And we've been through a lot of different things. I want to thank everybody who's participated in this process. Before I do that, I'm looking around. Are there any questions? Do you have anything you want to add?
You acknowledge that there is leadership at all levels
at all levels.
Already
Already there.
present, so.
And it may not be getting the visibility that is needed or the power that's needed, and ultimately the power of the purse and the ability to say, yes, this budget is accepted or not. And I acknowledge that Lane has budget problems. I don't even know exactly what your problems are, but I can tell you, I'm at the University of Maryland. Every school that I'm aware of is having budgetary issues. So whatever your budgetary issues are, you're going to have cutbacks, you're going to have setbacks, but how are you going to power through that and build something better? And that's where idealism will keep people coming to work, will keep people coming into the classrooms, keep people applying for jobs. That's what's going to get them here. Because otherwise, when you have a woe is me attitude, people don't want to be part of that. They want to be something bigger than themselves. And you have that here at Lane. It may not be exactly what you want, but let's keep pushing it up so it becomes more of what we really need. So let's look at these questions. This is the current iteration of the questions. Let me just read it so the people watching on the video will hear. We've been through a lot of discussion. We've gone from the version that I read a few minutes ago. This is the current situation. Question number 1 is, who are the groups affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision, and what are the potential impacts on these groups? Number 2 says, does this policy, program, practice, or decision ignore or worsen existing disparities or produce other unintentional consequences? Number 3, how have you intentionally involved stakeholders who are also members of the communities affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision in the decision-making process? Number 4, what are the barriers to more equitable outcomes around this policy, program, practice, or decision? Number 5, how will you mitigate the negative impacts and address the barriers identified above? And then the 6th question that's come out of our discussions over the past 2 years, how can we create safe space for healing and reconciliation to transform our structures, environments, and selves? And I'm really happy that we added that, because we have to acknowledge that there is some hurting going on. We have not gotten to the point of places like South Africa, which had a truth and reconciliation process, as flawed as it was. It was something to get people to say, what happened here, who was hurt, how can we move past this? So let's look at these 6 questions, and I think let's start. The easiest thing with such a small group, maybe we can all work as a group of the whole. Is that okay, or you want to work in a smaller? Okay, so let's just start with these 6 questions, and perhaps let's just start with number 1 and say, is that question ready to go? Do you see yourself using that in your department, in your program, in your classroom? I mean, is that wording something that you're comfortable with, or do you want to change it in any way? Start with somebody I haven't heard, maybe Nadia, you want to say something? Okay, well, all right, we'll start with Sarah then.
I was just going to say, I wonder, because we're such a small institution and there are so many instances, I'm thinking about things like our program review process, where you literally have one person doing something. And when we use only the language of groups, I guess my concern is that a lot of those smaller places on campus are smaller for reasons that are often not intentional, or not unintentional, I mean. And so if we are already putting somebody in a place where they are sort of standing alone by the structures we've created, and then we have a framing question that focuses only on groups, are we going to catch those pieces? So I guess my question would be whether or not we want to add individuals or groups.
I personally am a little concerned about using the word individual, because we want to make sure that we don't say, you personally are preventing the hospitality department from moving forward, or I mean, there's ways in which. But I understand what you're saying.
But the question is asking who's impacted.
Right, right.
So I think in that I would agree with you when you're talking about barriers to more equitable outcomes.
Right.
In that context, I would definitely not want to use an individual, but because of the structure of this particular institution,
right.
I do, like our ethnic studies program, for example, is pretty much an N of 1. Probably not completely unintentional, right? And so when I think about that in the larger context of things like budgetary decisions, for example, I do worry that if we're talking exclusively about groups being impacted, that those individuals who stand as representatives of what probably should be groups particularly are not represented in that context.
Yeah. Okay, other comments, Dennis?
Yeah, I think that's a good sentiment. And as far as the language, I think, you know, if in a more formal sense, we could say, who are the parties affected?
Yeah.
Or if we don't, if that's too bureaucratic sounding, who are those affected? But I think there is, I think when we say groups, in a situation where tiny numbers of people may be affected, then it introduces the idea that that groups are always important than individuals, and where there has been a real austerity environment, I think some of us, but I'll say I've seen that kind of dynamic, and so I think that's. I didn't see it before you said it, but I would agree that we just say those affected or the parties affected or something like that, and then it makes it very clear if there are people affected, then yeah.
Okay.
So what if it so the first sentence, what if it read, who is affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision? And
So
what are the potential impacts on
these people?
On these people.
Are these are?
Just stop at what are the
That's why
Yeah.
on these parties. That's why people use that word. But
Okay. Now, I'm writing notes here. Does someone want to be our official scribe here so that we have one person who's...
Yeah, like that. What are the potential impacts?
You want to be the official?
No, she's getting the machine. Yeah. My pad has limited power.
Oh, okay, all right.
But I was going to basically say, I'm just going to share part of my thinking. What am I not seeing? Okay, so who are the groups, et cetera, in terms of being inclusive, but what am I not seeing? Because I'm assuming that I'm not seeing everything, I'm just seeing the most obvious. So for example, from my point of view, since I've been here for 27 years, we've had 7 opiate crises, also alternating with meth, 7. So I could say that it's more or less been constant, but you choose to pay attention to it when it gets press, or because the people that are being affected you care about more than these other people that have been affected. Just as an example, right? So yeah, we can focus on groups, we can focus on individuals, but also we should also think about, in an equity lens context, what are we not seeing? What's being hidden? What if what we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg?
Right. Yeah. So, no, so Sarah, are you going to be typing or?
Yes.
Okay, so what is the final agreement on this question number 1? I heard Lynn was saying, who is affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision, and what are the impacts on these people? Is that what we've agreed?
I have actually a comment, and it might be, excuse me, because English is my second language, but I don't know. I think I would love to include in this the type of communication or the way we communicate, some inserted in as a part of this question, because I think the main problem why we're having this meeting and why we're here is because of a miscommunication, lack of communication among the college itself, and I think if we could put, you know, who is affected by this policy, program, practices, ways of communication or decision, because I think the way we're gonna be able to move forward is the way we're communicating. And if it's not included within the question, how the way we're communicating, it really, nothing else is gonna go forward, because we haven't learned how to communicate among each other and linking programs and helping programs, and I think that's very key for us to be able to to understand that communication is key for us to be able to move forward.
Yeah.
So I tried to incorporate that. I'm gonna read it and then you can tell me if I was totally
Oh,
So I'm gonna start from the beginning. Who is affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision? What are the potential impacts and how do we effectively communicate the effects and the impacts?
I love it.
Thank goodness for English.
Here's another angle at this, and that is not in opposition. But I think when we talk about framing, this gives people permission to raise issues. So if you even said, who are those affected by this policy, or even start out with this framing, policy, program, practice, or decision. In other words, it raises the question about how we are thinking about this early on, because how we think about stuff often has a whole lot to do with the policy, the program, the practice, or the decision. And so I think raising that up front is not a bad idea.
Well, we could
Okay, so
also-
I'm gonna try, I attempted to integrate Dennis, so I'm gonna try here. Who is affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision, and how it's being framed? What are the potential impacts, and how do we effectively communicate the effects and impacts? And feel free to tear stuff apart, I'm just trying to.
So I'm looking at question 3, and I'm wondering if question 3 isn't the means by which you find out how people are reaching out, communicating, and looping back. So the first, as I read, the first question is more of an inquiry question. The third question is more of an accountability question that you could lay out how you've done it and then potentially provide feedback about how you communicated, how you arrived at that, how you communicated out, how you got, not only how you put information out, but how you got information in from folks.
My worry with that is that communication should be the key element on how we are going to move forward. And I think if we put it at the last or in the middle, when we are saying, well, you know, let's put this policy and then try to figure out how to communicate, I think we're kind of not really accomplishing. You know, if I don't speak English and I just start blabbling in Spanish, it might be something really important that I have to say, but you have no idea unless you speak Spanish. And I think communication is key because a lot of us, the reason why we are here is because we want to be heard and we want to communicate and we want to move forward. And unless there is a very clear communication and a standard, or we are all understanding how we are communicating, we're speaking pretty much the same language, we're not going to be able to move forward. I don't know, that's just my personal.
So Nadia, so in terms of what you're saying, is this getting closer? Who is affected by this communication policy, giving it all equal weight by this?
That could be, yeah, that could work. Yeah, it's just a matter of, you know, the ways we choose to communicate, are we being effective? You know, and everything is among how we are able to communicate an idea or a goal. It doesn't always get communicated to everybody, or if it gets communicated, it can be confusing. And it has to be a clear communication so that we can move forward to what we're trying to do.
Is this closer then?
I still think the framing element is important. The communication is, do we all understand each other? Do we all have an opportunity to join the conversation? But I think that framing invites us to think about how is what does this language mean?
And I think what I'm hearing from Nadia is having communication as a separate item.
Correct.
And not included as a practice, but as a policy program,
Communication.
like Lynn, interpreted too. policy, program, communication, practice, yes? Is that what
Correct,
you- okay.
that's correct. Because it should be, we have all this beautiful thing that we're trying to do, but how are we communicating to every single identity? And communication goes both ways, not just here it is, but also what you have to say. And I think that's key for us to move forward.
Okay.
So I
Christine?
just want to do a pause for a second
Sure.
and see if this is closer, because as I'm typing, I'm resisting putting communication in that first list, because I think your argument is that it's bigger than that. It goes over all of these things.
Right.
So I tried this. Is this closer?
Maybe form of communication.
I think it's more than that. So, I mean, you're using the language of framing, which, okay, if you're talking about a square, in my work we talk about shifting the frame to basically say that there's a larger conversation. So there are certain words within Spanish, like confianza, which don't have an exact equivalent in English, but basically fall within the rubric of an equity lens. Basically, it's an unshakable faith, which doesn't mean confidence. All right? So being able to understand that the language we use and languages we use and put front and center have implications. And so we're a multilingual organization. So I haven't seen that necessarily stated explicitly, but we are a multilingual, organization. So being able to understand different languages that frame what we're talking about in an inclusive way and being intentional with that is useful.
Okay, so Christine's been waiting to say something.
So I just need some clarity on the questions and the purpose. So I'm getting mixed up in what is inquiry and what is practice and improvement. So is the intent of the questions to get people to examine and identify